So, over the weekend, I set out to go and see the legendary Lizzie Borden's house. I've heard so much about this place. I wanted to see it for myself, and luckily, I had enough time in my hands, so I said, why not? I packed a backpack, grabbed a few items, and then set off to Fall River, Massachusetts. I drove through different towns, and as I was driving, I kept thinking about this story. Why is it so important? Why is Lizzie Borden so popular? What is it about this axe murderer that, make the whole story so captivating, so interesting that people from all over the world, actually, far and wide, wants to see this place that I'm going to? Well, it's just the same thing as an urban explorer. You're curious, you want to see things, you want to tell stories, you want to understand how things are. And if you're like me, you actually want to be in this, and not just to hear the stories, you want to touch things in the house, you want to experience how these people used to live. And that's one of the things I enjoyed when I visited this house. The house have been redesigned so many times because it's passed down from one family, one generation to the other. So the newest owner did their best to keep the house in the same shape. The interior kept the designs and for the furniture to look just like it were back in 1892. But they are pretty very honest that to tell you that these items are not from 1892, but it's more like a replica. Like, for example, the bed frames, the couch, and everything is a replica. But anyway, so this was me approaching the house, Lizzie Boden's house in Fall River, Massachusetts. It wasn't that hard for me to locate. If you have a GPS, it should be a pretty easy drive. And I also figured that this place, will be very busy during the weekday, so I chose to come here on a weekend. Hi guys, I am in Fall River, Massachusetts, and behind me is the famous Lizzie Boden's house. So, something terrible happened here in 1892. Lizzie Borden murdered her father and her stepmother with an axe. Now, the case went to trial and she was acquitted, but then the mystery remains: what went wrong, what caused her to do it. Everyone knows that she did it, but then you know how trial goes and all that. So I came here this morning to see it for myself and to show you guys what it looks like. The house is no longer as old as you used to think. It's been gone through different owners and been refurbished, and in fact it's been turned to a bed and breakfast. So right now this is what the parking lot looks like, and there's even a gift shop. So this is the gift shop, the Lizzie Borden House gift shop. So I think you can go in there and pick some things that are kind of related to this house. So this is what the house looks like from the back, all the way. I mean, it looks green, it looks better now, but in the picture it wasn't like this, as you can see. So I'm gonna try to go inside. I don't know. I know there's a gate fee, but I'm gonna try to go in and see if I can take a look at the rooms. So I am going in. Wish me luck. Okay. So this is the famous Lizzie Borden house located on 232nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts. This is where Lizzie Borden and her father Andrew and her stepmother Abby all lived until she killed them. And I'm going to get into that story in no time. But if you take a quick look at this house, this is what it used to look like in the 18th century. You can see there's a tree in front, and the shed, which is now the gift shop, used to be at the back. And this is what the house looks like today when I took the picture. Nothing much have changed, just that they did some, fixing, maintained it. But of course, the fence is no longer there, and that tree is not there. So this is the living room, which is supposed to be the way it was back in the 18th century. Although some of these items are newer, but they made it to look the same way. This is the famous Lizzie. She was in her 30s when the incident happened. She was said to be a very interesting and highly intellectual young woman. She read a lot of books, and she made friends with some people. She was very outgoing, but then she was not happy. Now, you see, Lizzie came from a very rich home. Her father, Andrew Bourdain, was very rich. They lived in a very terrible part of town, but they had a lot of money, which was very confusing. But her father was more into real estate. He bought a lot of property in the area and rented it out to, immigrants and poor families, and he made a lot of money off them. And then Andrew Boden remarried when his wife died. His wife, which was Lizzie's mother, he remarried a lady called Abby. And Lizzie did not like Abby one bit, and she didn't hide her feelings. She didn't want to talk to her. She didn't want to respect her. Back then in the 18th century, kids were expected to call their step parents, as either mom or dad. But Lizzie did not want to call Abby mom. She just didn't want to have anything to do. She stayed as far away from her as she could. And you can imagine she's being so charitable out in public. And when she comes home, she doesn't want to extend that. So basically, the Boden family was not happy. And unlike Lizzie, who didn't like her stepmom, she had a sister called Emma who didn't really care. Emma tried as much as possible to get along with their stepmother. But then, matters got worse when Lizzie started noticing that their father was giving money and property to their stepmom's family. You can imagine finding out that your father, is now extending his wealth to his in-laws and not really giving a care about you. Like their father was very, very rich. He was a very popular man back in the day. The name Boden was it's a name reserved for rich, high class, influential people. So they came from a rich family, to say. But then the way their father treated them inside the house was not it did not reflect like people who came from such affluence. To the outsiders, there's a lot of money, but inside the house, the kids like Abby and her sister, they weren't feeling that. They also had a maid who took care of their needs, did the laundry, did some cooking, but Lizzie would prefer to talk to the maid and all that than accord any form of respect to her stepmom, and they all lived under this one roof. And their father knew that Lizzie was a problem, but he didn't want to separate them. He just felt like eventually she's going to outgrow this and get over it and all that. But then tension grew, more as they went by in the house. Lizzie felt that their father, that if for any reason something happens to their father, all his property, all his assets are going to be forwarded to their stepmom, and she and her sister would have nothing to rely on. Now, this is already an enough motive for anyone who's contemplating murder, because then if she killed her father, then it means that if she killed her father and his wife, which is the stepmom, then by right she and her sister would be the only members of the Boden family left, and automatically they will inherit the property. So I think this is what made everyone feel like, yes, if anything happened to their father, then Abby can be held responsible, because there was a motive. I mean, who else would want Andrew dead in such manner in his house? Andrew was said to be a very frugal man. You can imagine how upsetting it would be that the houses he rented out to immigrants and people of low income had electricity and bath. But then the house that he's living in, where he shares with his daughters and his wife, did not have electricity. I mean, what kind of a man would give all kinds of comfort to his tenants, but cannot also enjoy the same in his house? And that upsetted Lizzie a lot, because she was seen as this rich man's daughter, very classy young woman, well spoken, and she had a particular dress style. She was very fashionable and all that. So she needed all that to match her way of life. But then in her home, there was no electricity. And it didn't make sense. Like, why would daddy do something like this? And of course, Andrew kept showering his wife and his in-laws with money and all that, but then didn't really treat his girls well. Now there was also stories that Lizzie was a bit of a kleptomaniac. When she went to stores, she would steal some items, and then because of the respect people had for her father, because of how influential he was in the community, they didn't want to disgrace him, so they would instead send him a bill. So whenever something like this happens, Andrew would apologize to the vendors and promise that it would never happen. He would even tell them that he gives his daughter some money to shop, and he doesn't understand why she doesn't come there with money, or why she chooses to, steal stuff from them. But then he would go ahead and settle the bill and tell them, hey, please, if you ever notice something like this again, don't panic, just come to me and I'll pay right there. But then when he comes home, he's upset with his daughter because this girl is embarrassing him. She's disgracing him out there. Everyone knows him to be a rich man in the community. Imagine people coming out telling him that his daughter stole something. And because of that, he started to feel withdrawn from Lizzie. He was always lashing out at her. He didn't trust her. And he put a key in his office. There's an office up in his bedroom, a little corner where he did his study and kept his checkbook and all that. So because he felt like Lizzie is a thief, he suspected that if he didn't lock that office, Lizzie could go there and steal things from him. So imagine this kind of tension in the house. This was what happened, for quite a long time until the worst happened. Now, the day before the murder, they had a house guest, which was Uncle John Moss. Uncle John was Lizzie Boden's uncle. He was Lizzie Boden's mom's brother, and he's been in a good relationship with their father even after his sister died. So he keeps coming to the house to discuss and check up on the family. But for some reason, he did not like the way Andrew was raising his girls. He always felt like Andrew wasn't taking care of them properly. He had his own concerns. So, the day before that incident, he visited. And then on Thursday morning, which was the day of the incident, Bridget, the maid, woke up at 6, prepared breakfast, and by 7, everyone was already at the dining table except for Lizzie. Lizzie did not want to come down because she was upset with her stepmother. She doesn't like to be around her. She would rather eat in her room than sit on the same table with her. It was just so much hatred that initially it looked normal, but I mean, everyone thought she was going to get over it, but no one actually knew how much she hated this woman. But then after breakfast, everyone left the table. Uncle Moss left the house to visit some relatives nearby. The maid cleaned up the table. Mrs. Borden, Abby Borden, went up to clean up the guest room and also take care of some errands. So she was in the room making the bed when someone came up to her. I don't think she knows she was threatened by this person. It seemed like a very familiar face in the house because she didn't scream. No one had her scream. There was no sign of struggle. And this person hit her in the head and went on to hit her about 19 times until she died. The picture you're looking at is the actual picture of the crime scene. That's Abby lying on the floor. So when I went to the house, I saw exactly where Abby was murdered. Apparently, she was not looking, she didn't see who came up to her and hit her. And this is exactly the spot where she lay in the photograph. It's just so strange standing over there after so many years. That's her on the floor. And that same afternoon, while Abby was dead in the guest room upstairs, Andrew, her husband, came home and he rested on the couch in the living room. He had with him the key to his office upstairs, and he was wearing this special jacket. It's more like a coat that they used to wear back in the day. He loved it very much. He didn't really like anyone touching it. Now, according to Bridget Sullivan's account, Bridget is the housemaid. She narrated that when Andrew came home, that she had him, struggling with the door, and eventually she had to let him in. And then he also saw Lizzie coming down from the staircase to greet her father. But then something happened between Lizzie and Andrew when Andrew was sitting down in the couch in the living room. They had a little disagreement. They always have disagreements. They always argue. Lizzie wants something, but the dad says, no, you can't have it. Or he starts to remind her of, how old she is and why she's not been doing anything useful for herself. All that frustration and all that. And Lizzie doesn't like when her dad speaks to her in that manner. He makes her feel worthless and all that. So it seemed like, Andrew rested on the couch you're looking at right now. He was resting there, and Lizzie went upstairs and came down. Now, this is based on, interviews from every member of the family. No one can actually say what happened in this living room. But what investigation showed was that he was resting on this couch, and then someone came up, uh, you know, on the side of the head where he couldn't, fight back, and started hitting his head. The person hit him so many times that there was nothing left of his face. And then Bridget Sullivan, the housemaid, says she was doing some chores, she was cleaning the windows, and when she was done, she went to her room in the attic to rest. But then shortly she heard Lizzie calling her to calm down quick, that father is dead, that somebody came in and killed him. That was what Lizzie told her. So he rushed down and saw Andrew. This is actually the real picture of Andrew Sullivan. This was exactly how he was found. His face was so bashed, you can't even make out, where things are supposed to be. One of his eyeball was dangling out of the socket. So Bridget had to call the police, and then went upstairs to bring a bed sheet to cover him, so that people wouldn't just come in and start looking at the grotesque side. But then when she went upstairs, that was when she saw Abby also lying on the floor. Abby was found face down, exactly as in this picture. This is also a real photograph of Abby Boden in 1892 when this incident happened. So, with all the commotion and everything happening, there's a pool of blood upstairs where Abby lay. There's a pool of blood downstairs where her husband lay. People said that when Lizzie came into the room, she didn't feel any remorse. She wasn't crying. She didn't feel anything. She was just there. Her hands were just steady. She didn't feel like someone who had just witnessed something that terrible. And that was one of the reasons that made people believe that she did it. I mean, she had a motive, right? The other people, the maid, what could motivate the maid to want to kill her boss? Nothing. The maid didn't really have much to say, although she didn't like the way she was treated by the rich kids of the Bodens. But still, it wasn't enough for her to want to kill her boss and her boss's wife. So you can imagine how this issue affected everyone in the community. It was just so bizarre that something like this would happen to the Bodens. I mean, like I said, their family was well known. Everyone thought that they were doing well from the outside. There were no issues that would trigger, such an incident. And they haven't had that kind of murder happen in their community in a while. So who would do such a thing? Basically, who done it, right? And then by the next day, the story was on the front page of news throughout the country. And when, after 2 days, the police could not produce any axe wielder, because it's been already confirmed that an axe was used to kill Andrew and Abby. But then the police went in search of an axe person, but no one, there was no axeman. So when they couldn't produce anyone, the police began interrogating every member of the family, neighbors, friends, just to get together what happened in that house. And another thing is that the police had a hand in messing up the crime scene. And I wouldn't fault them that much. I don't blame them, because back in the 18th century, forensic was a new concept to them. They weren't trained on how to investigate an issue like this. I mean, this is more like a double homicide, and it's not something that they're used to seeing. And there was just no process, there was no rule book on how to, open up that kind of investigation. So you can imagine the police coming in, walking around, touching everything. There was no gloves, there was nothing, tampering with the evidence, doing this, doing that. People are allowed to come take a look and all that. And it gave the suspect, Lizzie Borden, a lot of time to get rid of, evidence. For example, the dress she was wearing, right? It had some blood stain on it. And when Bridget, the housemaid, was asked about this dress, she said, well, this is Lizzie's dress. And I remember we have just painted the house not too long ago. And I remember telling Lizzie not to move too much because her dress would rub on the paint. So that kind of like made it okay. So this blood stains you're looking at is from the paint in the house. It's not really from blood. And remember, again, there's really no process for forensics. So the police kind of overlooked that part. I mean, if the housemaid could testify in that manner, then no one would really accuse, no one really saw Lizzie doing such a terrible thing. And then when Lizzie was asked about the dress, she too said, well, I have been in my period. So it's expected that my dress will be stained every now and then. So you can imagine the policeman looking at her. I mean, this is something that they don't really want to talk about, a woman bleeding and all that. They don't really want to get into the mess of it. They don't want to see it. And when they went to Lizzie's room, they saw a bucket where she's been dumping napkins soaked in blood, because back then they weren't using actual pads. They were using cloths, pieces of cloths as pad. So there were pieces of cloth in that bucket with blood stains on them. But because Lizzie had already said she was in her period, again, the police overlooked it and like, well, that could be her period bucket. So they don't really want to dig through it. And when interrogators asked Lizzie where she was on the day of the murder, on that particular time of the incident, where was she in the house, she would give different interrogators different answers. She would say, oh, I was in the backyard. Oh, I was in the loft getting a piece of iron for sinkers. Or I was up in the loft eating pears. Or, I was just in the toilet. And when the community found out that Lizzie was under suspicion by the police, oh my God, newspapers printed it. Everyone, there were just about the whole country were criticizing the police. Like, why would they even suspect such an innocent young woman? Because back then, Americans were certain that well brought up daughters could not commit murder with a hatchet on sunny summer morning. And their direction was not entirely without rationale. I mean, again, look at this family. Look at Lizzie. Look at her pretty face. Look at how elegant. Look at how well spoken, how classy she looked. Why would she even think of something so dangerous? And of course, the rich people from all parts of the country were writing mean letters to the police, criticizing them, wondering why they are thinking that Lizzie is responsible for such an atrocity. And reporters found Lizzie's composure very disturbing. It's like someone who such a thing has happened to is not expected to be so focused, so attentive, and without any nervous feeling. They could just wonder how composed she was from the beginning to the end. For example, when she was seen in her house when her father died, she didn't look stressed. She didn't look terrified. She wasn't even crying. She was actually well dressed. She looked very neat, which kind of raised the suspicion that if she had killed someone, then she would have time to go and change her clothes. And I think that's exactly what happened. But then again, because of the lack of intelligence in solving this case, the police skipped a lot of information, like what happened to her dress and the story about the paint that stained her dress and the bucket filled with period stain. And then this carried on until the last day of the trial, when Lizzie broke into tears when she had her lawyer give his closing statement. He said that no person could have committed that crime unless his heart was black as hell. And delighted, newspapers artists catch the tearful Lizzie listening to the lawyer as he spoke. Now, would it be a stranger or would it be the one bound to the murdered man by ties of love? What does it mean when we say the youngest daughter, the last one whose baby fingers have been lovingly entwined about her father's brow? Is there nothing in the ties of love and affection? This was how Lizzie's lawyer played the whole thing in the trial. And of course, the jury took it from there. They sat down for an hour and 10 minutes. They spent 1 hour talking about how Andrew was in the community, how he was loved and respected. And then they took 10 minutes to deliberate about Lizzie and the involvement. They reviewed every information in front of them, came out and told the judge that Lizzie was not guilty. That was how she was acquitted of this crime. So after Lizzie was acquitted, she inherited her father's wealth and moved on to live the kind of life she's always imagined. She bought a house in the upscale part of town. Remember, she used to live in this dingy part of town because of her father, who didn't really want to spend a lot of money. But this time around, she and her sister, they moved out of where they used to live, and then she went and bought a local newspaper that printed a lot of nasty things about her during the trial. She bought that newspaper and destroyed every single article that one reporter wrote against her. She didn't like them and she destroyed them all. And then the next thing was she was throwing this very nice party. She was inviting celebrities from across the country. She was a very good host. People said she was very nice. She enjoyed herself. She lived up the life she's always wanted. And of course, Americans were actually glad that she was acquitted, because again, she did not look like the suspect, and there was no reason why the judge should put her in jail. And yet, the surprising thing was that Lizzie spent her life doing good for the community. She donated a lot of money to causes. She donated to churches. She did a lot of good stuff. And then she loved pets. She loved dogs and cats. So she donated money to pet rescue in the community, and that pet rescue have been living off that fund, because even up to date people still go and donate money just because of what Lizzie started. And that's very surprising and confusing, because this is a woman that was accused of double homicide. The way she murdered her parents, it just makes you wonder, can someone do something that dangerous and still be a good person that want to help the community? It just didn't make sense. But of course, she was loved by all. People respected her. Her name will forever trend. I mean, this happened in the 18th century, and here we are in 2021 still talking about her as if it happened yesterday. And one last thing, when I visited the basement of Lizzie Borden house in Fall River, I saw this laundry pot. So they would boil it. They would boil water in it and then soak their clothes in it, and then they will use the wooden paddle you're looking at to stir the clothes. That was how they cleaned their clothes back in the day. But there was something creepy that I need you guys to take a look. While I stood here taking this picture, I turned my flash on my iPhone and then I captured this wall. The tour guide explained to me that the wall has been sandblasted 6 times, which is supposed to make it smooth, but it just doesn't want to smoothen. They have tried everything they can, so they decided to leave it alone. But then when you step back a little, you're going to see a face of a man, a face, it looks like someone who was thoroughly beaten up. If you stand out a little, you're going to see it. I did not edit this picture, so you might not see it, but if you stand far away, you would see it. So this is one creepy thing I found in the house. It's also very fascinating that what is this face? Why is it on the wall, and what is it trying to tell us? What is stopping this wall from being sandblasted? I don't have any rational response to it, but I would leave it up to you guys to decide. Well, in general, I enjoyed my visit. I love the history behind it. I mean, this is one big story that everyone, talks about. If you watch the history documentaries and stuff, or crime scene or cold cases, this story comes up as number one. To date, we don't know what happened in this house. So, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you can get more updates like this, and have yourself a good day. Bye bye.